Part 1. The Stitch. The transition from day to night in Blackwood Ridge did not occur in gradients. There was no romantic twilight, no bruising of purple hues to soften the blow. One moment, the sky was a sheet of heavy industrial gray. The next, it was as if a velvet shroud, soaked in ink, had been dropped over the world. The light didn't just fade, it was strangled. Elara shifted the weight of her backpack, the nylon straps digging into shoulders already tender from a 12-hour shift at the fulfillment center. Her body was a map of aches, her feet throbbing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The main road, a winding ribbon of cracked asphalt that looped lazily around the dense forest, promised safety, promised streetlights, passing cars, and cameras. It also promised another hour and a half of walking against a biting November wind that gnawed at her ribs. She stopped at the trailhead. The locals called it the Stitch. The name wasn't affectionate. It was descriptive. The trail threaded directly through the heart of the forest, stitching the sterile, concrete industrial park to the decaying residential district in a messy, jagged line. It was a scar on the land. Cut the walking time down to 20 minutes. Maybe 15 if you walked with purpose. Elara pulled out her phone. The screen illuminated her pale, drawn face in a harsh, ghostly blue. 14% battery. Plenty, she muttered. Her voice sounded incredibly small against the vast, looming wall of pines. Just 15 minutes. In and out. Don't look at the trees. She stepped off the pavement. The transition was immediate and physical. It was like stepping into a meat locker. The temperature plummeted 10 degrees in a single stride. The air here didn't move. It hung suspended, heavy with the scent of pine needles, wet rot, and something else. Something faintly metallic, like a mouthful of copper pennies. For the first few minutes, Elara kept her head down, forcing her eyes to focus on the dirty white toes of her sneakers navigating the labyrinth of exposed roots. They crisscrossed the path like varicose veins, slick with damp moss. She knew this path. She knew the geography of it. She knew the ancient oak that looked like a screaming man. She knew the boulders spray-painted with fading, obscenity-laden graffiti from 2008. But tonight the forest felt dense. Usually the woods were noisy, the rustle of squirrels, the hoot of an owl, the distant, comforting hum of tires on the highway. Tonight there was nothing. It was a vacuum. The silence wasn't empty. It was pressurized. It pressed against her eardrums, creating a low-frequency thrum that seemed to vibrate in the roots of her teeth. Elara checked her phone again. She had been walking for what felt like 10 minutes. The battery read 13%. The GPS signal was searching, the little circle spinning endlessly in a void of gray grid lines. "Just keep walking," she whispered. The sound of her own voice startled her. It didn't echo. The trees seemed to absorb the sound instantly, swallowing it whole before it could travel a foot. She passed the screaming oak. The knot in the wood, twisted into a mouth open in agony, seemed to catch the peripheral beam of her phone light. She looked away quickly. 3 minutes later, she passed it again. Elara stopped dead. The air in her lungs turned to ice. She shone her phone's weak flashlight beam at the tree. The same gnarled knot, the same frozen scream. "No," she said, a nervous, jagged chuckle escaping her lips. "Don't be stupid. Trees look alike. It's a forest. Everything looks the same in the dark." She began to walk faster. The fog began to roll in, not descending from the sky, but seeping up from the ground like sweat from the earth. It wasn't the misty, ethereal fog of movies. This was thick, yellow-tinged, and smelled of stagnant water and sulfur. It swirled around her ankles, obscuring the path, forcing her to trust her memory of the ground. Her foot caught on a root, and she stumbled, barely catching herself on a nearby trunk. Her hand slapped against the bark, felt wet, slimy. She pulled her hand back in disgust. It wasn't sap. It was a clear, gelatinous substance that coated the wood like mucus on a throat. It was warm. She wiped her hand frantically on her jeans, her heart rate kicking up a notch into genuine fear. Just get home. Just get to the streetlights. Ignore the slime. Ignore the cold. Then came the sound. Snap. It was crisp, distinct, and close. Directly behind her. Elara spun around, the flashlight beam cutting a frantic arc through the fog. The light illuminated nothing but the vertical bars of tree trunks and the swirling mist. "Hello?" she called out. Her voice cracked. "Is someone there? I have pepper spray." She didn't have pepper spray. She had a dead phone and a half-empty water bottle. Silence, but not total silence. After a 3-second delay, she heard a sound that made the fine hair on her arms stand up. It was the sound of a foot lifting out of mud. A wet, sucking squelch. Then silence again. Elara turned back to the path and started walking. Faster now, her stride turning into a power walk. Her breathing became ragged. Step, step, step. From behind her, step, step, step. It was mimicking her, but the rhythm was slightly off. It was a fraction of a second delayed, like an echo that had gained mass and weight. It wasn't just sound. She could feel the vibration of the impacts in the soles of her feet. She stopped abruptly. The footsteps behind her stopped. But they didn't stop cleanly. There was a scuffing sound, like something struggling to halt its momentum, sliding on the leaves, like a dog trying to stop on a hardwood floor. She held the phone up like a weapon. The flashlight beam trembled violently, and then she saw it, just for a microsecond. To her left, about 20 yards away, the fog seemed to part. Something tall and pale stood between two birch trees. At first, her desperate brain insisted it was just another birch, white bark, thin, swaying. But birch trees don't have elbows. The shape was impossibly thin, blending perfectly with the vertical lines of the forest. But as the stray beam of light hit it, it folded. That was the only word for it. It didn't crouch. It collapsed in on itself like a broken deck chair, silently dropping into the ferns. Elara's breath hitched in her throat. A primal, reptilian part of her brain, the part that remembered when humans were not at the top of the food chain, screamed, "Predator." She didn't wait to see it rise. She ran. The path, which should have been straight, began to twist. The geometry of the woods was breaking down. Trees seemed to lean in, their branches interlocking like fingers to block out the sky. The ground became treacherous, soft mud that tried to suck the shoes off her feet. Thump, thump, thump. The pursuit was no longer trying to be stealthy. The thing behind her had abandoned the mimicry. It was heavy now, bounding. It didn't sound like a human running. It sounded like a large animal, running on four limbs, striking the earth with terrible, galloping force. Elara risked a glance over her shoulder, shining the light backward. The beam caught a nightmare. It was crawling, but it was crawling with the speed of a sprinting man. Its limbs were too long, multi-jointed, snapping out and pulling its pale, emaciated body forward. It had no clothes. Its skin was the color of curdled milk, stretched tight over a skeletal frame that looked like it had been assembled by someone who had never seen a human before but was trying to build one from memory. But it was the face that nearly stopped her heart. It had no nose, no lips, just a smooth expanse of wet skin and two eyes that were nothing but black, light-absorbing voids. And beneath them, a jaw that hung open, swinging loosely with every impact against the ground, as if the muscles holding it were severed. Elara screamed, a raw, tearing sound, and pushed herself harder. Her lungs burned as if she were inhaling glass. "Help! Someone help me!" She crashed through a thicket of thorns that tore at her jacket and cheek, but she didn't feel the pain. Adrenaline was flooding her system, turning her into a machine of pure panic. She saw a light ahead. A street lamp? A house? She sprinted toward it, tears streaming down her face, blinding her. "Please, please, please." She burst through the final line of trees and fell onto her knees, gasping, waiting for the hard asphalt of the road. But her hands didn't hit pavement. They sank into soft, wet moss. Elara looked up, wiping the tears and snot from her face. The light she had seen wasn't a street lamp. It was her own phone. It was lying on the ground in front of her. She stared at it, confused, her brain misfiring. How? She was holding her phone. She looked at her right hand. It was empty. She looked at the ground. There lay her phone, screen cracked, flashlight beaming upward into the fog like a beacon. She stood up slowly, spinning in a circle. The trees, the screaming oak, the graffiti rock. She was back at the start. She had run for 10 minutes, sprinting for her life, only to end up exactly where she had encountered the creature. The forest hadn't just blocked her way. It had looped her. It was a closed circuit. Akilinyar. And then, the flashlight on the ground flickered. 1% battery. Darkness rushed in from the edges of her vision. From the darkness, a smell washed over her. Rotting earth, copper, and something sweet, like spoiled meat. And a voice. It didn't come from the trees. It didn't travel through the air. It vibrated directly inside the wet gray matter of her brain. It sounded like shifting tectonic plates, grinding and deep. Elara. She froze. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't move. Run, fast. The phone died. The light vanished. Absolute, crushing blackness swallowed her. It was a physical weight pressing against her eyeballs. She stood there, blind, listening to her own heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. To her right, inches from her ear, she felt a change in temperature, a coldness that radiated from a living thing. She heard the wet, sticky sound of lips parting. A hot, breathless exhale brushed against her neck. It didn't smell like air. It smelled like the bottom of a grave. But, run, faster. Elara stood frozen, her muscles locked in a rigor of pure terror. The breath on her neck had ceased, but the presence remained. She could feel the displacement of air, the subtle shift in pressure as something massive and spindly maneuvered around her in the pitch black. It was circling her, inspecting the goods. She squeezed her eyes shut. It was a useless gesture. The darkness outside was identical to the darkness within, but it was the only defense she had left. Then a touch. It was impossibly gentle. A finger, cold, dry, and textured like old parchment, grazed her cheek. It slid down her jawline, tracing the bone, exploring the tremor of her lips. Felt ancient. Dead things shouldn't move, and they certainly shouldn't touch with such deliberate, sadistic curiosity. Elara wanted to scream, but her throat had constricted into a tight knot. Only a pathetic, broken whimper escaped. The voice returned to her mind, drilling into the base of her skull. So, warm, the syllables were wet and slurring, echoing in her head as if her own thoughts were being cannibalized. Fragile, container. The finger hooked under her chin and tilted her head up. Elara's knees buckled, and she collapsed. She didn't fall far. The ground seemed to rush up to meet her, but it wasn't the soft moss from before. It was hard, packed earth, cold dirt. She scrambled backward on her hands and heels, kicking blindly. Her shoe connected with something solid like a tree trunk, but softer. Would that felt like meat? She recoiled, gasping for air. "Please," she whispered into the void. "Just let me go." The forest answered with a sound that sounded like a laugh, if a laugh could be made of cracking branches and grinding stones. "Go?" The voice mocked her, resonating in her teeth. "There is nowhere to go. The path is mine. The trees are mine. You are mine." A flash of imagery exploded in her mind, violent and intrusive. It wasn't the forest. It was her apartment. She saw her own kitchen, bathed in the blue light of the microwave clock. She saw her hallway, the rug slightly askew. She saw her bedroom door, left ajar just an inch. And in the vision, she was looking at herself sleeping. She saw the back of her own head on the pillow. The perspective shifted. She was looking out from under her own bed, watching her own ankles dangle as she sat up in the morning. Elara gagged. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. It hadn't just found her tonight. It had been there, watching, waiting. The creaks in the floorboards she had ignored. The feeling of being watched while she brushed her teeth. The cold drafts in a sealed room. It had been cultivating her fear, aging it like wine. "I know the flavor of your dreams," the voice hissed. The air in front of her grew frigid. The smell of copper and rot intensified until she could taste it on her tongue. It was right in front of her face. She could hear its jaw unhinging, the wet stretch of cartilage preparing to strike. Part 2. The landlord. Click. A sound ripped through the clearing. It wasn't a branch snapping. It was mechanical, precise. The sound of a heavy switch engaging. "Hey! Back to the dirt, you filth!" The shout was human, rough, angry, and undeniably real. Before Elara could process the sound, the world exploded into white. A beam of light, so powerful it felt solid like a physical bar of energy, cut through the fog. It bypassed Elara completely and struck the space directly in front of her face. The creature shrieked. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was the sound of a frequency that shouldn't exist, a high-pitched, digital vibration that made Elara's vision blur and her teeth ache. In the harsh, unforgiving glare of the spotlight, Elara saw it fully for the first time. It was inches from her nose. Its skin was translucent, revealing dark, pulsating veins beneath that pumped black sludge instead of blood. Its mouth was a vertical slit that had opened wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth that angled inward, designed to pull meat down the throat, never to let it go. As the light hit it, the creature's skin seemed to sizzle. Steam rose from its pale flesh. It recoiled violently, its long, multi-jointed limbs thrashing in the air. It moved with insectoid speed, scrambling backward, shielding its black eyes with long, skeletal hands that had too many knuckles. "Move!" the voice shouted again. "On your feet!" The man holding the light advanced. He didn't run. He walked with a heavy, stomping cadence. He swept the beam like a weapon, keeping it trained on the creature's face. The monster hissed, a sound like steam escaping a high-pressure valve, and then, with a movement too fast to track, it twisted its body and shot upward. It didn't climb the pine tree. It ran up it, defying gravity, its limbs puncturing the bark for grip. The branches shook violently, raining needles down on them. Then silence. The heavy breathing of the man filled the clearing. He didn't lower the light. He swept the canopy, checking the branches, spinning in a slow, tactical circle. The beam cut through the fog, revealing empty branches. Only when he seemed satisfied that the thing had retreated to the upper darkness did he lower the beam, though he didn't turn it off. He walked over to Elara. He was older, maybe in his 50s. He wore a heavy canvas jacket stained with grease and mud, a dark beanie pulled low, and thick workman's boots. He held a large, modified industrial searchlight in one hand, wired to a battery pack on his belt, and a pump-action shotgun in the other, slung casually over his shoulder. He didn't offer a hand. He just looked down at her, his face grim and lined with exhaustion. His eyes were constantly moving, scanning the tree line. "Can you stand?" he asked. His voice was gravelly, devoid of sympathy but full of urgency. Elara nodded, though she wasn't sure. She forced her trembling legs to straighten, using a tree for support. Her knees felt like water. What was that?" she choked out. "We don't have time for a nature documentary," the man snapped. He grabbed her arm. His grip was strong, bruising, and pulled her toward a gap in the trees. "It's blinded, not dead. It'll circle back once its eyes adjust. We need to be at the road by then." "But the road? I walked for an hour. It kept looping." "That's because you were walking in its house," the man said, not slowing his pace. He was dragging her more than leading her. "I know the back door." They moved fast. The man didn't use the path Elara had been on. He cut straight through the brush, stepping over logs and ducking under branches with a familiarity that suggested he had memorized every inch of this hellscape. The forest felt different around him. The fog seemed to recoil from his light. The silence wasn't as heavy. It was as if his presence, or perhaps his absolute lack of fear, forced the illusion to break. "You're a ranger?" Elara asked, trying to keep up, her lungs burning. "Something like that," he grunted. "I'm the guy who cleans up the mess when idiots decide to take a shortcut at night. I just wanted to get home. They all do. That's how it gets you. Impatience. Fatigue. It baits the hook with convenience. It feeds on the desire to be somewhere else." He stopped suddenly, shining the light on a specific tree marked with a deep, three-clawed slash. The sap oozing from the wound was fresh and black. He stared at it for a second, his jaw tightening, then corrected their course slightly to the left. "Is it a ghost?" Elara asked, her voice small. The man let out a short, humorless bark of laughter. "Ghosts are memories. That thing is flesh and blood. Ancient flesh. Hungry blood. Some call it the Pale Stalker. I just call it the landlord. Because if you're in here after dark, you're paying rent." "Why didn't you shoot it?" "Bullets don't do much but piss it off," he said. "It heals too fast. But light, pure, high-lumen focused light, it hates it. Burns the retina. Confuses its echolocation. It's the only thing that buys you distance." He paused, looking back into the darkness behind them. "Keep moving," he whispered. "It's coming down from the canopy." Elara didn't hear anything, but she didn't question him. She ran. The trees began to thin. The oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, replaced by the distinct chill of normal wind. Through the gaps in the trunks, Elara saw the orange glow of sodium streetlights. Civilization. They burst out of the tree line onto the cracked pavement of the old access road. The hum of the distant highway sounded like a choir of angels. The air smelled of exhaust and asphalt, the sweetest smell Elara had ever known. Elara collapsed onto the curb, burying her face in her hands. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered audibly. The man stood at the exact edge of the forest. He didn't step onto the pavement. He stayed on the dirt, a guardian at the threshold. "You're safe here," he said, turning off his massive light. The sudden darkness felt less threatening now, washed out by the ambient glow of the street lamps. "Thank you," Elara sobbed, looking up at him. "You saved my life." The man looked at her. Under the street lamp, he looked older, tireder. His eyes were dark, haunted by things he hadn't spoken of. "I didn't save you," he said quietly. "I just interrupted the meal." Elara froze. "What?" "It chose you, kid. It doesn't hunt randomly. Tracked you. Tasted your fear. It knows your scent now." He adjusted the strap of his shotgun, shifting his weight. "Go home. Lock your doors. Keep the lights on. If you hear scratching in the walls, turn up the TV. If you smell wet earth, burn a candle. Do not look into dark corners." Will it come for me?" Elara asked, the dread returning, colder than before. The man hesitated. He looked at the forest, then back at her. "It's a predator. If a wolf tastes blood and the prey gets away, the wolf doesn't just forget. It follows the trail." He turned back to the woods. "Wait," Elara called out, standing up on shaky legs. "Where are you going?" "Back in," he said, clicking his light on. The beam cut a lonely, stark path into the black trees. "It's still hungry. If I don't keep it busy, it might decide to come out here sooner than expected." Without looking back, he walked into the darkness. The fog swallowed him within seconds. Elara was alone on the side of the road. She reached her apartment building 20 minutes later. She didn't walk. She ran. Every shadow cast by a parked car looked like a crouching figure. Every rustle of a plastic bag in the wind sounded like a footstep. The lobby of her building was bright. The elevator was bright. Her hallway was bright. She unlocked her door, stumbled inside, and locked all 3 deadbolts. Click, click, click. The sound of metal sliding into place usually brought relief. Tonight, it felt insufficient. She turned on every light. The kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom, even the closet. She stripped the lampshades off the bedside lamps to make the bulbs harsher. She checked under the bed. Nothing. She checked the shower. Nothing. "It's over," she whispered, collapsing onto her bed, fully clothed. She was still wearing her shoes. He stopped it. "It's over." She lay there, staring at the ceiling, her heart rate slowly returning to normal. The adrenaline crashed, leaving her exhausted. Her eyelids grew heavy. Just a nap, she thought. Just for an hour. The lights were on. She was safe. She closed her eyes. The apartment was silent. The refrigerator hummed. A car drove by outside, its bass thumping rhythmically. And then, from the inside of the heating vent directly above her bed, came a sound. Scrape. Elara's eyes snapped open. Scrape. Scrape. It was the sound of something long and hard dragging against sheet metal. It wasn't a rat. Rats scurry. This was a slow, deliberate drag. And then, the smell hit her. Not from the forest. From the vent. The thick, heavy stench of wet earth and copper. The voice didn't come from her head this time. It came from the ceiling, whispered through the metal grate, intimate and terrifyingly close. "You left the door open." Elara lay paralyzed. The apartment was a fortress of artificial light. There wasn't a single shadow in the bedroom deep enough to hide a spider, let alone a monster. But light cannot stop sound, and light cannot stop what is already inside. Scritch, scritch, pop. A screw head on the vent cover, painted over with layers of landlord white, began to rotate. It moved with agonizing slowness, defying physics. There was no screwdriver, no tool from the outside. Just force. Pressure applied from within the ductwork. Ping. The screw shot out of the drywall and landed on her duvet. It looked like a small, dead beetle. Elara scrambled off the bed, backing into the corner of the room, clutching a heavy brass lamp like a club. "Go away!" she screamed. "I called the police. I have a gun." The voice drifted down from the ceiling. It wasn't the psychic whisper anymore. It was acoustic now, bouncing off the metal walls of the vent. "Liar." The voice sounded like dry leaves being crushed. "Open the way." The second screw popped. Then the third. The heavy metal grate swung down on its last hinge, dangling like a broken jaw. For a moment, nothing happened. Just the dark, square mouth of the vent gaping open in the pristine white ceiling. Then a hand appeared. It didn't look like a hand. It looked like a bundle of white roots. Fingers, far too many of them and far too long, curled over the edge of the vent. They were covered in a clear, sticky slime that dripped onto her pillow. Sizzle. The slime hit the cotton pillowcase and smoked. Elara threw the lamp. It smashed against the ceiling, shattering the bulb. Bad move. The room dimmed instantly. Now only the hallway light spilled in, creating long, stretching shadows that reached toward her. The creature poured itself out of the vent. That was the only way to describe it. It didn't climb down. It flowed, like wet dough, its body elongated and stretched, bones dislocating and snapping back into place as it squeezed through the narrow opening. It hit the mattress with a heavy, wet thud. The bed frame groaned under a weight that shouldn't have been possible for something so thin. Elara turned and ran. She sprinted into the hallway, slamming the bedroom door behind her. She locked it. She backed away, staring at the wood. Smash! The bedroom lamp, the one she had left on the floor, shattered against the door from the inside. The creature was destroying the light sources. It was smart. It knew the rules of the game better than she did. The hallway lights flickered. BZZZT. Darkness. Then they flared back on. BZZZT. Darkness again. Longer this time. "No, no, no," Elara whimpered, backing toward the kitchen. "Please, God, no." She grabbed the largest knife from the butcher block on the counter. The stainless steel blade shook in her grip. The kitchen was open plan. No doors. No locks. Just a wide, exposed space. The bedroom door handle began to rattle. It didn't turn. It just vibrated, as if the entire door was being shaken by an earthquake. Then silence. Elara held her breath. Had it stopped? She looked down at the gap beneath the bedroom door. The light was off inside, but then she saw it. A shadow, but not a shadow cast by light. A shadow that possessed mass. It was seeping under the door. Like black oil, it oozed through the crack, pooling on the laminate floor of the hallway. The pool of darkness began to rise. It defied gravity, knitting itself together, reforming into vertical lines. Bones snapped into place with the sound of pistol shots. Skin stretched over the void. Standing at the end of her hallway, blocking the exit, was the Pale Stalker. Here, in the context of her apartment, it was even more terrifying. In the forest, it blended in. Here, against the clean white walls and the framed photos of her family, it was an abomination. It was too tall. Its head brushed the ceiling, its neck bent at a sickening angle to fit. Its black eyes locked onto hers. It smiled. Its mouth didn't just open. It split the lower half of its face. "You brought me to the buffet." Part 3, the lease. It lunged. Elara didn't think. She threw the knife. It was a desperate, flailing motion, born of instinct rather than skill. But at this range, it was impossible to miss. The 12-inch stainless steel blade spun through the air and struck the creature in the shoulder. Thwack! It sounded like a cleaver hitting a side of beef. The knife sank deep into the pale flesh, burying itself to the handle. The creature didn't even flinch. It didn't scream. It didn't bleed red. A thick, viscous black ichor oozed around the blade, bubbling slightly as it touched the air. The creature stopped moving. It looked down at the handle protruding from its shoulder with a look of mild confusion, like a human noticing a mosquito bite. It reached up with its long, spindly hand, wrapped its fingers around the grip, and pulled. Schlock! The sound of the knife leaving the wound was wet and sucking. The creature dropped the knife to the floor. The wound on its shoulder began to knit together instantly, the black sludge sealing the gap like rapidly hardening glue. Elara turned and scrambled into the bathroom, the only room left with a lock. She slammed the door and twisted the flimsy privacy lock. She backed away until her legs hit the bathtub, then climbed inside, pulling the shower curtain closed. She curled into a ball in the porcelain tub, sobbing uncontrollably, her hands over her ears. "It's not real, it's not real, it's not real." "It is real," the voice whispered. It didn't come from the door. It didn't come from her head. It echoed up from the chrome drain in the tub, vibrating against her hip. Elara scrambled out of the tub as if it were filled with boiling water, slipping on the bath mat and crashing onto the tiles. Bang! The bathroom door shuddered violently. A fist or a claw had struck the wood with the force of a sledgehammer. Plaster dust rained down from the door frame. Bang! The wood splintered around the lock. The door bowed inward. Elara looked around frantically. The mirror, the heavy porcelain lid of the toilet tank. Useless. She needed fire. The ranger said it hated light. Maybe it hated heat too. Her eyes landed on the counter. A large can of hairspray. Beside it, a long-nosed butane lighter she kept for the scented candles she burned when she was stressed. Crack. The door exploded inward. Splinters of painted wood and drywall flew across the room like shrapnel. The creature stood in the doorway. It filled the frame completely, its shoulders hunching to fit, its head scraping the lintel. The smell of the grave filled the small, tiled room, instantly overpowering the scent of lavender soap. It didn't rush this time. It savored the moment. It stepped onto the bath mat. Elara flicked the lighter. A small blue flame danced. She aimed the aerosol can. Whoosh! A torch of fire, 3 feet long, roared toward the creature. The monster shrieked. A sound so high and piercing that the bathroom mirror behind Elara shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Glass rained down on her hair and shoulders. The fire engulfed the creature's face. Its translucent skin blistered and blackened instantly. It thrashed, its limbs flailing wildly, knocking the sink off the wall. Water sprayed everywhere, hissing as it hit the hot pipes. But it didn't retreat. Through the flames, a hand shot out. It was fast, faster than the fire. It wrapped around Elara's throat. The cold was absolute. It wasn't just physical cold. It was the temperature of the void between stars. It froze the blood in her jugular vein. The lighter fell from her numb fingers. The flame died. The creature lifted her off the ground as if she weighed nothing. Her feet kicked helplessly at the air. His face was burned. The skin was peeling back to reveal raw, gray muscle and dark bone, but the eyes were untouched. The black void stared into her soul, unblinking, unfeeling, pulled her close. Its breath smelled of old copper and her own fear. The light burns. It hissed, its voice no longer inside her head, but hot and wet against her ear. But the dark consumes. Elara clawed at the hand choking her, but it was like clawing at granite. Her vision began to tunnel. Gray spots danced before her eyes. The sound of the rushing water from the broken pipe faded into a distant roar. "Why?" she mouthed, unable to force air through her crushed windpipe. The creature tilted its head, the burnt skin cracking as it moved. It seemed to genuinely consider the question. "Because you looked." It opened its jaw wide, wider than any jaw should go, unhinging with a wet pop. Rows of needle teeth glistened in the flickering hallway light. And then darkness took her. Epilogue. The police report filed 2 days later was brief and unsatisfactory. Incident: missing person/possible break-in. Location: apartment 4B, Blackwood Ridge. Victim: Elara Vance. The responding officers noted signs of a struggle. The bathroom door was destroyed. The mirror was shattered. There was significant water damage from a broken pipe that had flooded the unit below. But there was no blood. Not a single drop. They found her phone on the kitchen counter. It was fully charged. There was one unsent draft message. "I shouldn't have taken the shortcut." The detectives assumed foul play but had no leads. The ranger from the woods was never found. The local station had no record of anyone matching his description employed in the last 10 years. The case went cold after 3 months. They assumed she had run away, or perhaps been abducted, though no forensic evidence pointed to a second party. The apartment stayed empty for a while. The landlord replaced the bathroom door, fixed the plumbing, and painted over the strange, dark stains on the ceiling that kept bleeding through the primer. Then, a new tenant moved in. Lewis was a young guy, a student at the local technical college. He liked the location. It was quiet, cheap, and close to the woods where he liked to fly his drone. On his first night, he was unpacking boxes in the bedroom. It was late, almost midnight. The wind was howling outside, rattling the window panes. He paused, a box of books in his hands. He heard a sound. Scritch, scritch. It was coming from the vent above the bed. He looked up. The grate was screwed on tight, freshly painted with a thick coat of white. Probably just mice, he muttered, tossing the books onto the desk. He turned off the lamp and lay down in the dark, exhausted. He pulled the duvet up to his chin. He closed his eyes. The room was silent. From the darkness directly above him, a voice, soft, feminine, but sounding incredibly old and hollow, whispered into the room. Oui. The student's eyes snapped open. He stared up into the black square of the ceiling. Who's there? He whispered, his heart hammering. The silence stretched, heavy and smelling faintly of copper and lavender. Then the voice answered, I am.